Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, which is a technical deep dive on Zerto in Azure. I'm James from Data Barracks, and I'm going to do a very quick introduction before handing over to Chris from Zerto, who's going to be taking us through the session today. We've worked with Zerto for a really long time. I think back as far as 2012, it might even have been 2011. And when Zerto originally launched, the thing that it was known for, its big USP was replication at the hypervisor level. And that was a really exciting innovation. We used it for our disaster recovery as a service to replicate VMware environments into our private cloud. Now, over time, Zerto has grown far beyond that particular use case, as Chris is going to cover in a second. But what I want to quickly say before we get into that is why we're so keen on Zerto and on Zerto into Azure in particular. So we are Data Barracks, we're a service provider, and we offer lots of different technologies. Now, whether that's the replication, data protection technology, or the cloud target that we're replicating that data to and spinning up in the cloud. And there's no single technology that's right in every instance, but for the majority of use cases, for the last probably 12 to 24 months, our recommendation has predominantly been use Zerto and Azure. And the reason for that is the shift that I think has taken place over the last sort of 5 years. 5 years ago, a lot of businesses that we worked with looked at disaster recovery as a service as an end in and of itself. People just wanted disaster recovery. Now that's changed. I think there's still a requirement for disaster recovery, but also a lot of organizations are looking at Azure and evaluating it as a potential long-term option for their infrastructure. So DRaaS into Azure achieves a couple of things. For DR, it's great. The costs are low, recovery speeds are very fast, and we generally find that the complications are less in the setup, so it's quicker to get up and running. But it's also a really nice way to dip your toe into Azure and get some familiarity with it, so that when you're doing those evaluations, you know exactly what it is that you're getting. Now, I'll move on to the next slide and just do some very quick housekeeping for the session today. So we're scheduled for 30 minutes today, and that does include some time for Q&A. Type in your questions on the right-hand side if you have any. We'll go through those at the end. And thank you to those who did submit a couple of questions already. We'll start with those ones when we get to it. And then lastly, to say the slides will be made available, and we are recording the session today, so we'll send that out later today. And then lastly, just before I hand over to Chris, I want to mention just how nice it is to be doing a session today on the technology. It's really nice to be talking tech when over the last few months we've understandably have been predominantly talking about the wider operational business continuity challenges around COVID-19. So I hope everyone on the session today has been managing well, getting on well with their preparations for returning to work and the relaxing of the lockdown restrictions. But I want to mention, if those areas are of interest, please take a look at the BCP cast. So it's a business continuity podcast that we produce. We go out and we speak to some of the largest organizations in the world, folks like Google, BP, The Guardian, and we speak to their business continuity managers to get their advice and recommendations. So we recently held our first ever live podcast with some of our favorite, most interesting returning podcast guests, and we asked them their opinions on the business response to coronavirus. So what has been done well, what has been done wrong, and why it caught so many people off guard. It's an interesting listen. Please take a look. If it's something you'd like to take a look at, you can find it on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, or go to the bcpcast.com website and you can listen there. So with that plug done, I shall hand over now to Chris. Thank you for taking the time for this, Chris. Over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. So my name is Chris Rogers. I'm a cloud architect at Zerto. So I've been with Zerto a little over a year now, and previously worked at a service provider similar to Data Barracks. So I've kind of seen both sides of the fence, and I'm really excited to be able to present to you today kind of the advantages of using Zerto and Azure and Data Barracks in partnership together to kind of meet your DR and IT resilience requirements. So we're going to go into kind of a deep dive and more of the tech around Zerto and Azure and Data Barracks, what they can provide, and kind of some of the business outcomes on the back of that. So just a little bit of background of kind of who Zerto are. So we were established in 2009. So not really that old considering some of the some of the companies in the world, the Dells and the MCs, and have been around for a lot longer than that. So relatively young company, but have made a big impact and a disruptor into the kind of business continuity, backup, disaster recovery space, if you will. So we've got two HQs, one in Boston and one in Israel. So we're co-headquartered out of there, but we have offices worldwide. So one in the UK, in Australia, and et cetera, et cetera. 7,000 global customers worldwide. So that is from all sectors, from all continents. We're really making an impact, all around the world. Got some of the biggest names in the partnerships here. So obviously AWS, HPE, and obviously Microsoft, we're going to be talking about today. And actually ZertoCon was only last week, and Microsoft were our global sponsor for that event. So they really see the value in Zerto and kind of what we're doing in around DR and migration and those types of services into Azure. So our vision at Zerto is to enable an uninterrupted world for all technology users, consumers, and businesses. So that's kind of our mission statement. And that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with, IT resilience. So we were known kind of in 2009, 2010, 2011 when Barracks started kind of partnering with us for purely disaster recovery. We were in the hypervisor. We kind of revolutionized that place. We moved it up the stack from the storage into the hypervisor and all the gains that came with that. But into kind of today's world, disaster recovery covers a lot more things than just infrastructure failures. We're now thinking about ransomware, which is probably one of the biggest challenges to businesses at the moment, and probably one of the biggest threats around as well. But also not just unplanned, also planned outages as well. So things like migrations, consolidations, application mobility, infrastructure modernization, like patching, testing, and all those things that cause or can cause disruption to businesses. And how Zerto, Barracks, and Azure can kind of combine all of these things together and help you achieve all of the things on this screen without any disruption to your business. So where do we start? So we started with probably best-in-class replication engine. So we have continuous data protection. So that kind of consists of the four key things you can see here. So continuous data replication. So we don't schedule anything. Everything's done on a continuous basis. Then we have a journal-based recovery. So that is very, very simply a log of everything that happens and changes to your virtual machines over a period of time, and then we can recover to any of those points in time. Application consistency grouping, which I'm going to go through a little bit later on as well, essentially grouping your VMs into an application-centric kind of group to make sure we can recover those as one unit rather than individual VMs. And then long-term retention, keeping those checkpoints for longer periods of time beyond the short-term journal that we keep. And then wrapped on top of that is our orchestration and automation. So we don't bolt on an additional product. We don't have anything that you have to script if you don't want to. We have an API available. However, everything in our product is designed to make the complex workflows of disaster recovery or IT resilience kind of very simple and make it user-friendly and easy to do. Instead of having a 30, 40, 50-page run book, we're going to be able to fail over in 3 or 4 or 5 clicks to be able to go into Azure and back out again. And then wrapped around all of that is our analytics and control. So giving you visibility into your DR infrastructure, giving you visibility onto your RPOs and RTOs as well, and not just assuming everything's okay, but knowing everything is okay as well. So our architecture, it's really, really basic. Again, everything at Zerto is all about making things nice and super simple. So on a production site, so a vCenter or an SCVMM Hyper-V site, we'll have a Zerto Virtual Manager. So that is the brains of the operation, kind of like the quarterback, does everything, does the orchestration where you log into. So it's a little bit like the vCenter of the Zerto operation is where you log into and everything's controlled via. And then from there, we would deploy virtual replication appliances. So these are very small Linux appliances. They get deployed one per hypervisor host you have in your on-premise environment. So if you had 10 ESXi hosts, for instance, you would have 10 virtual replication appliances. The beauty of this is we can scale up and down with you. So we don't have to size from day one what your DR infrastructure and what your DR IT resilience infrastructure is going to look like. If you start off with 3 nodes or 3 ESXi hosts in your environment, we have 3 VRAs. But as you grow your environment and you go to 5, 6, 7, we don't have to resize anything. We just add more virtual replication appliances as you add more hosts. So we scale up and down with your environment in a like elastic manner. And then into Azure, we have a cloud appliance, very simply, and the cloud appliance combines the roles of a Zerto Virtual Manager and a virtual replication appliance. So it does all the logging and the data movement as well. So the VRAs are responsible for moving the block level data from on-premise into Azure or into a Barracks data center as well. And we can also do a one-to-many architecture. So we don't have to choose just one location for our data to be sent, we could choose up to 3 different locations as well. So that could be, for instance, 2 different Microsoft Azure regions and a Barracks data center as well. For those really risk-averse customers out there, you want 2 or 3 copies of your data somewhere else, we can do that. And then as we move into, okay, I'm going to be trying to plan my DR or plan my Azure infrastructure. How do I know how much storage I'm going to need? How do I know what compute I'm going to need? How do I know what my change rate is? How do I plan my WAN? So at Zerto, we've created this planning tool. So it's all part of our SaaS service, which is part of Zerto Analytics. So essentially, we look at the I/O and the change rates and the bandwidth requirements for all the VMs that are currently running on-premise. And then we can plug those into our planning tool and chuck out a nice little screen for you to see, and it says, this is your WAN requirements to replicate these virtual machines. These are the journal size you're going to need, and this is the recovery disk size you're going to need. Oh, and here's how many Zerto cloud appliances you're going to require to replicate that amount of VMs and that amount of workload. So really taking all that planning hassle out of doing that, and we do all the number crunching for you, and we can put that into like an Azure calculator or speak to the guys at Data Barracks, and they're going to be able to help you right size the environment in Azure, so we know we're going to get an accurate costing and accurate estimations of how much it's going to cost to do replication and then eventually failover into Azure as well. So continuous data protection, what is it? So what we do is any write that goes through the VM, through the hypervisor, they get written into our journal, which is the first in, first out queue. We maintain write order fidelity throughout that, so we know which write came first, so we're not going to promote any writes that we don't need, or further in front of one that is required previously to it. So as they enter the journal, they fill up. And as we enter those, we then enter checkpoints into the journal every 5 or 10 seconds apart. Those then checkpoints are then used for recovery points in time. So we're going to be, our RPO is going to be 5 to 15 seconds, depending on the WAN requirements and bits and pieces like that. But 5 to 15 seconds of RPO. And then as new writes are going into the journal, the old writes are pushed out to the replica disk. So then new writes and new checkpoints can be taken. And we just do that constantly. Every time that a write's taken, we're doing that constantly. So our journal supports up to 30 days at the moment, but we can have as little as 1 hour. So depending on what you choose for your journal history, depends on how many checkpoints you're going to have to recover from. But in a typical day, normally I see around, give or take, 1,000 checkpoints for VMs to be able to recover to. So compare that to once a day for traditional backup and recovery. We're well ahead in terms of granularity. And then inside of Azure, so instead of taking our product and lifting and shifting it from what works on VMware and Hyper-V on-premise and just lifting and shifting that into Azure and saying we've got a great product and it works, what we've actually done is gone away, spoken to Microsoft, our partner, and said, how do we make the best of your platform and what the cloud native capabilities have? So we've introduced things like Azure Queues and Azure Scale Set VMs as well. So we're using some of the native architecture in Azure to actually make things more efficient for you guys in Azure when you're failing over and when you're replicating into Azure. So all I/O enters into an Azure queue, and then we spin up scale set workers to read the I/O from the queue and place it into block blob and page blob storage. And we just do that continuously. And obviously, the amount of I/O that goes into the queue determines the amount of scale set VMs workers we node. So we do horizontal scaling rather than scaling up and out and more replication appliances needed. We use a scale set VMs to get the elasticity of what you need for your business. It's not going to be a single thing, a single replication every single day. That's going to change. As people log on in the morning and do changes, that's going to potentially be heavier than over lunchtime. So we'll be able to spin up and spin down those scale set workers depending on the amount of workload going through them as well. And then we're going back to our journal technology. So it enables no impact testing as well. So we can fail over into Azure, spin up IaaS virtual machines on the right networks, right VNets, etc., with the right network gateways in front of them, on the right t-shirt sizes. But also we can have your on-premise infrastructure still running and serving your customers as well. So we can do that for as many times as we like. So we kind of get rid of that horrid DR testing every year where you've got to take everything down and spend the whole weekend away from our families and trying to do that with outage and going, okay, we got 95% of the way through. We had to stop because we had to get the systems back online by 6 a.m. Monday morning. We can do testing whenever we need on a regular basis. That could be every week, every month, every 6 months, whatever you want, but it's non-impactful to production. And we can test and fail over from seconds ago. So it's not going to be the last scheduled backup or the last snapshot that was taken. We're going to be 5 or 10 seconds behind production. So in terms of data loss, we're going to have minimal data loss, either in a test environment to test our DR, or in a live DR requirement, we're going to have minimal data loss compared to a backup of last night's. Application consistency with write order fidelity, we covered that earlier, and then we can recover multiple VMs consistently in an application, and then back down to the second as well. So when we're looking at traditional protection, what we have is we have an application and we need to protect that. So normally that happens over a backup window. So from 11 p.m. till 5 a.m. in this case. So we have our backup window starting, we have our app server, web server, DB server, file server. And that all makes one application that serves out to our customers or our users. And we're treating those as individual VMs, whereas realistically they all rely on each other. So each VM actually isn't really useful on its own. The ecosystem and the application requires each one of those components to be up. So with traditional protection, we're going to have big gaps between when we've actually protected that server and protected the next one in the thing. So when we're coming to recovery, it's an inconsistent recovery because there's going to be from 2, 3, 4, 5 hours difference. So we're going to start going into things like redo logs on DB servers, and the file server isn't going to potentially have the files needed that the app server requires, etc., etc. So we come into this inconsistent recovery piece. Well, what we do as Zerto is every 5-10 seconds, we take all of those virtual machines that make up the application, and we take a checkpoint across all those virtual machines from exactly the same point in time. And we're doing that consistently every 5 to 10 seconds. So when we come to recovery, we have a single recovery workflow to recover all of those virtual machines, and they're all going to be from the exact same point in time. So when we're talking about kind of RTO, it's not just when the VM boots. For me, RTO is when your users or your customers can continue to use the service or application that they need to use. And this is going to speed up that RTO because we haven't got to worry about redo logs and all those types of things. They're going to be from exactly the same point in time and in sync with each other. So we get a nice consistent recovery, and again, a simplified DR and recovery workflow. And as we're going into Azure, and we're talking about Azure today, we have specific orchestration in place for Azure. So we know that that virtual protection group and those groups of VMs are failing over to Azure. So we have specific settings. So you can see here VNet, subnet, network security groups, recovery disk type, the virtual machine series, and the virtual machine sizes. So all Azure language, so we can make sure we're failing those VMs over onto the right VNet, onto the right subnet, with the right NSG and network gateway in front of it. Maybe for failover and live, you want premium managed disks, but failover test, you want standard disks because you don't want to pay for the performance, Or then maybe you want a slightly different virtual machine size for failover live and failover test, and we can provide that in our workflows as well. So all orchestration unique to Azure and not just generic orchestration. So I'm going to show you the really complex workflow for failing over into Azure using Zerto. I mean, when I say really complicated, very simple. So first step, we click the buttons down the bottom left-hand corner, so the test or failover button. We then choose which VPGs we want to fail over, and if we want to fail them all over, we click the top box and that selects all. So that's 2 clicks. We select our options. So we select the checkpoint we want to choose from. So that is which point in time are we recovering those virtual machines from. We select our commit policy. So how long do I want to be able to test before I commit to Azure? And do I want to enable reverse protection or not? And that's a tick box. So if we're enabling reverse protection, that literally flips everything in reverse and starts protecting from Azure back down to the site it came from. That's how easy Zerto is. It's 1 tick box to enable that workflow back in the opposite direction. So 3 clicks and then 4 clicks, start failover. And that is it. That's all we have to do to be able to fail over into Azure. It's very simplistic, very easy. And then we also have the advantage as everything looks the same. So whether we're going from vSphere into Azure and into Data Barracks, whether we're going from Hyper-V to vSphere and Azure, or whatever the workflows are, it all looks identical. The user interface and user experience are identical across whatever platform we install across. And that gives a nice coherent feel, and it doesn't make a difference where we're failing over realistically too. There's obviously subtle differences between the orchestration workflows, because on a vSphere, we don't have things like network security groups and VNets. We have port groups and things like that. So there's subtle variations, but it's all going to feel familiar. So we don't have to learn 4 or 5 different tools for varying different workflows. It's all the same tool and one experience and one product to learn. And we also released support for Azure VMware solutions. So if you're trying to go into Azure and you think shutting down your secondary data center is the way forward because it's going to save you loads of money going forward, but actually you're not really familiar with Azure, obviously Data Barracks can help you with that. But also, if you want to help manage your solutions with tools like vSphere and things, the Azure VMware solution is a great workload for that, and we can support that as well. So we can still use Zerto either into native Azure or the Azure VMware solution as well. So either way, whichever you want, we've got you covered across that. So kind of wrapping up. So DR, backup, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, great for migration use cases as well. But the key thing here is it's one platform. So we haven't got Zerto for Azure or Zerto for vSphere or Zerto for DR or Zerto for migration. It's all one platform, just with varying use cases and various ways of doing things inside of it. But the whole platform is super simple to use and very easy to deploy, and most importantly, with no disruption to anything. That's from installation through to testing and through to DR. We're not going to impact the virtual machine. So there's no snapshots being taken. There's no scheduling happening. We're just doing everything kind of transparently to production workloads, ready for when we need to fail over, or ready when something hits, we're ready to fail over into that Azure environment and make sure everything's up and running. And because we've tested it many, many times beforehand, we're really confident it's going to work. And we're going to be down to seconds of RPO versus potentially hours or days worth of RPO as well. So if you guys want to get hands-on with this or see some demos, contact the guys at Barracks. They're our Azure specialists in the UK. Those guys know Azure and Zerto like no one else does. They're really, really great. They're a really nice team there. So yeah, speak to these guys. They really are a great partner of ours. We trust them with all of our Azure stuff. So yeah, speak to these guys if you want to organise a demo or more information. Yeah, they really know their stuff. So that's all from me, and I think we're going to do questions now.
We are. Thanks so much for that, Chris. That was brilliant. That was a super succinct run through of all of it. So I'm going to start with the questions that we had submitted with the registrations. But if you have any others, anything else that's come up, then pop them in, and we'll see if we can get through as many as we can. So the first question, and actually I'm not going to put this one to you, Chris. I'm going to take this one. So the question is, can the solution be tailored to perform file level restores? I understand it's a replication solution, but we don't want to have two solutions, one for backup, one for replication. We want one solution that can do both. So the reason I'm going to take this one is that it's always a bugbear, I think, for ours, that most, if you ask a software vendor, can it do this? I think obviously the answer will always be yes. But and in fact, I guess the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we actually did an entirely separate webinar on this. So take a look on our YouTube channel. There's a recording of it, which is when you can use a combined backup and replication solution. The answer though is yes. So there's a number of customers that we've done this for, where we've performed single file level restores for a particular file. So Chris mentioned, I think, earlier about the length of the journal, and this I think is what's interesting with the way that Zerto is approaching this. So it started as a replication product, but is obviously taking on more, and they're doing interesting things with how they're approaching backup, but from a very different point of view compared to a lot of the other technologies. I think originally, so a number of years ago, we would have had for most of our customers a much shorter journal, perhaps only if Chris, it could have been down to an hour, but probably it would have been a day or 2 days. And then I think it was perhaps around 2016, 2017 when we saw the big surge in ransomware, and so immediately at that point we extended those recovery journals for a lot of customers. But as I say, it can now be pushed up to 30 days for those other scenarios where you're not needing to recover from your most recent copy, but something that could have been perhaps 2 weeks ago before an infection. But it's certainly the answer is yes. And if you want to get into the detail, obviously we can kind of talk through the specifics of that another time. So this first one then for you, Chris, do you need large backup requirements to fail over to Azure? What methods are needed on premise to allow this to seamlessly take place?
Yeah, so was that about bandwidth? Sorry, James, was it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, we work from 5 meg upwards. So we have things like oil rigs and stuff using Zerto. They don't get the RPOs of what I've said, 5-10 seconds, because they're using like a satellite link to transfer data across. But what they're getting a consistent recovery. So the way that we work is, I like to use like a little analogy here. So imagine we've got a sink, and we put the plug in for our sink, and we open the tap, which is our data being written to our VMs, right? And during the day, we're not sending any of that data using a normal backup and recovery solution because it's impactful to to those production VMs. So everything's kind of backing up. And then once our backup window opens, we kind of let the plug go, and all that data's got to filter through that pipe and through that funnel as quickly as it possibly can before we have to put the plug back in the morning again. What we do at Zerto, because we're non-impactful, we can leave the plug open the whole time. So no matter how much flow you've got going through that plug socket, it's not going to fill the sink up, because we're just doing that constantly. So actually, because we're drip feeding the same amount of data change through a day over a 24-hour period rather than maybe a 5 or 6 hour period in a backup window, actually our bandwidth requirements are actually less than normal backup products. Mainly because, as I said, we're drip feeding that data, so we've got more time to utilize the network. So we probably utilize the network more frequently than a backup product would do. But actually, in terms of its peak, we're not using as much. So we're using it more frequently, but probably less speeds and less bandwidth requirements in total. Hopefully that answers the question.
Perfect. Yep, I think so. Hopefully that's answered it. So next question: how does Zerto work with SQL and Oracle? What major application databases could be recovered using Zerto?
Yes, we've got some great white papers on SQL databases, and actually, there was a customer quote that came out from ZertoCon last week around SQL, and actually they've actually managed to save licensing requirements. Instead of using SQL Enterprise and using like always on availability groups and those types of things, they actually ditched those, went down to single SQL nodes and used Zerto to replicate them to their DR site. So it saved them a load of money on the SQL Enterprise licensing, which pretty much paid for Zerto 3 or 4 times over. And also they get much greater granularity. They can do cross hypervisor replication. They can get it into Azure as well as that. One thing I would say, it's all dependent on what's supported in the platform you're landing in. Also, so SQL Server is supported, and Oracle is going to be supported, but just make sure wherever you're landing, those applications are supported. But essentially, we're agnostic to what's inside the VM, so we can replicate any I/O that goes through a virtual machine, and it doesn't have to be supported in terms of inside the application, because we have nothing inside the OS. So we're essentially agnostic to those applications. So I'm sure, James, you've got customers replicating SQL databases, I'd imagine, into Azure with no problems at all.
Yep, absolutely right. Perfect. Okay, I'll jump to the next question. I think this is one that perhaps you actually did end up answering, but I'll pop through anyway. So it was just, can you confirm the Zerto has geo-redundant storage as opposed to just UK South or UK West? So I guess you covered this when you talked about the one-to-many replication, but with you.
Yeah. So we store everything in our journal and replica disks in Azure, but you can store. To keep costs down, we always tell people to restore in just a locally redundant storage in Azure. But then we can have a secondary location of that as well. So it's not just about the data that Zerto is sending. The data is obviously one part of it, but it's all the orchestration that goes into it as well. So it's not just shifting data. It's actually building the VMs on demand and attaching that data. We store things in page blob and block blob storage, and then once we invoke a failover, we actually promote that data into premium managed disks. So we're not storing data in premium managed disks all the time to keep the costs down. So if you're wanting geo resilience, I would say point to 2 different regions, and then if a region does go down for whatever reason, it's not just the data that's going to be affected, it'd probably be the IaaS in that area as well. So if you do just geo resilient storage, spinning up, your storage is going to be resilient, but we're not going to be able to orchestrate into a new region. Whereas if you use our one-to-many feature, we're going to be able to orchestrate into whatever region you want. And that doesn't have to be UK South and UK West. It can be US East, mainland Germany, wherever you want to be. It can be completely disparate across geos as well.
Perfect. We do have a number of other questions here. I think we've got time for one last one before the end of this session, but I promise Chris and I will go through these and we'll respond to all of the questions individually. So the last one then, regarding vCenter SCVMM, can it work with standalone HV/cluster?
So we have to have System Center Virtual Machine Manager just for the orchestration. So we need to keep track of where all the VMs are on whichever host they are, and essentially we use your System Center Virtual Machine Manager or vCenter to orchestrate everything that happens. So, keeping track of where VMs are, where data stores are, which VMs are attached to which data stores, etc. So we do need those management components, and especially more important when we're doing failback from Azure, we use those APIs that live in those management components to orchestrate building of the machines again and re-IPing and putting them on the right networks, etc. So we do need System Center Virtual Machine Manager or vCenter, but we work with any version of vCenter, so it doesn't have to be enterprise. It can be vSphere, standard, whatever it might be.
Perfect, fantastic. Well, that takes us to time for today, and we're always super keen that we don't overrun where we can't. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Chris, so much for running us through all of this, and we shall promise to get back to everyone with any other questions, and we'll distribute the slides and the recording later on today. Thanks all.
Thank you very much.